Shabbat shalom, everyone. So good to see you all. The other day, I came home from a full day of synagogue programming. I was so tired. I felt like my brain was just going to melt out of my skull. I was exhausted. All I wanted to do was just lay on the sofa and veg out. You've probably been there before. What's great about being a dad is when you're exhausted, you come home and you've got kids. And all they want to do is use your body as a trampoline or have you make them snacks, or they want to ask you about 49,000 questions. So I've come up with a new activity for the Hodson house to alleviate the burden of parenting. I came up with this title. It's called Put On Some Movie, is what it's called. This is how it works. Very elaborate. I put on Netflix or the Disney Plus app on the TV, and I let the kids find something that they want to watch, and I approve it, and they watch it. That's the whole thing. And you've got to be careful while you do this, because there's some really weird things on TV nowadays. And if you're not paying attention, your kids will put on a slasher film with lots of violence and lots of craziness, and we can't be having that. So you've got to pay attention. So the other day, I'm exhausted, and I say, put on some movie. And they go to Disney Plus, and they find the 1995 classic animated film, Pocahontas. And they say, Dad, can we watch this? And I think to myself, well, this is not my first choice. But then again, I'm not going to like anything that they choose. And I have seen this film, although that was 31 years ago. I don't remember there being anything too controversial, but I was 8 years old when I watched it. It can't be that bad. I'm too exhausted to entertain them now. So I said, okay, put it on. And they did. And wow. I want to start off by saying I was kind of impressed at just how bad this movie was. If you've never seen it, I'll give you a brief synopsis. And important side note, you should know that while this film is theoretically based on real events, most of it in the story is completely reimagined or just explicitly made up. Here we go. Synopsis of Disney's Pocahontas. Pocahontas is a young Native American woman living in the New World with her pet raccoon and hummingbird. She meets a very tolerant English settler named John Smith, who is ironically voiced by Mel Gibson. When I think of tolerance, that's who I think of. Smith has recently arrived in Virginia with other Jamestown colonists. Despite the hostility between their two people, Pocahontas and Smith fall in love and begin to imagine a world in which their two cultures might coexist alongside one another. But when war breaks out between her tribe and the colonists, Pocahontas saves John Smith's life. And then there's a bunch of drama that's not really interesting. There's also a random creepy talking willow tree, and then randomly a really great song called Colors of the Wind, and that's the movie. That's what it is. Friends, this is a really bad film. No one should ever watch this movie. Maybe if you're interested, put on the song Colors of the Wind. It's great. Terrible film. What's great about watching movies with your kids is that the worse the movie is, the more questions your kids will have about it. And guys, they asked a lot of questions about this movie. Most of the questions they asked were basically, did this actually happen the way the movie presented it? And after doing just a little bit of research, most of my answers were a profound no. From the offset, this movie's problematic because although the supervising animator, his name was Glenn Keane, he chose to depict Pocahontas as about 18 or 19 in the film. Historically, the real Pocahontas would have been about 10 years old when she met John Smith, and there is no record at all of the two of them having a romantic relationship of any kind, thankfully. She was 10. Additionally, the famous scene where she saves him is very, very highly questionable. In fact, what really happened to Pocahontas, if you read her life story, it's not featured in the film at all. It turns out she was actually kidnapped by the English colonists in 1613 by a man named Captain Samuel Argall, who arranged her capture because he hoped to use her as leverage against her father, the chief Powhatan. The chief offered the captain English prisoners. He offered them corn. He offered them trinkets and jewels for her release, but Captain Argall refused, and eventually Pocahontas was forced to marry an Englishman named John Rolfe, and their marriage produced a temporary peace between her tribe and the colonists. None of this is in the movie. Pocahontas and Rolfe have a son named Thomas, and in 1616, Pocahontas traveled to London, where she was presented to English society as an example of the civilization and the Christianization of the savages in the New World. And in March of 1617, Pocahontas became mysteriously ill while planning to return back home to Virginia, and she died in England probably about age 21. Now, after hearing about what actually happened to Pocahontas, one can totally understand why Disney decided to leave all of that out of the film. Go figure, little girls don't want to see their favorite Disney princess become a hostage and then enter into a forced marriage. Oy! But whether we like it or not, I think it's important to acknowledge that events like this were commonplace here in North America, not even that long ago. And the more we examine the marriage practices of antiquity, unfortunately, the more common the situations like these actually were. In fact, in our Torah portion for the week, Parshat Teitze, it begins with a discussion of this idea. I'm going to read you a translation. Quote, "When you take the field against your enemies, and Adonai your God delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her that you would take her for a wife, you shall bring her into your household, and you shall trim her hair, pare her nails, and discard her captive's garb. She shall spend a month's time in your household, lamenting her father and mother, and after that, only after that, you may come to her and thus become her husband, and she shall be your wife. Then you shall no longer want her. If then you should no longer want her, you must release her outright. You must not sell her for money, since you had her. You must not enslave her." Now, for the modern reader, I understand this type of text might seem somewhat primitive and perhaps not sensitive to women or their role in society back then or even now. But believe it or not, after reading this series of passages, I think the Torah is attempting to do something remarkable here. It's taking one of the most ugliest realities of the human condition, especially the ancient human condition, the reality of war and captivity, and the Torah wants to place moral limits around the person who has the power in this scenario. The Torah does not pretend that war is not going to happen. It does not pretend that human beings will always act nobly when they are given power even over other people. Because the Torah understands something fundamental about human nature, that we have free will. And free will means that we are capable of extraordinary acts of goodness, but also extraordinary acts of evil and bad things. So instead of simply saying, this practice doesn't exist, the Torah says, in effect, if human beings are going to do this, there must be rules about how they behave when they have captives in their power. And when we examine those rules, it's fascinating. They say you can't simply take this woman and immediately do whatever you want with her. You have to bring her into your home, and she has to be given a full month to mourn her mother and father. Now think about how remarkable that concept would have been in the ancient world. A soldier sees a captive woman, and his instinct tells him one thing, but the Torah tells him something else. The Torah tells him to see her as something else, to see her as someone's daughter, not simply as just another one of the enemy, but someone's child. A child who has had a family that she has been separated from, a home that she has lost, and a life that existed before that soldier ever laid eyes on her. Now I want to be very clear. I am not suggesting that what happened to Pocahontas was okay. It wasn't. She was taken from her people and used as leverage against her father, and whatever happened afterwards does not erase that fact. But there is an important distinction between saying that something is morally acceptable and recognizing that something happened. And the Torah is willing to acknowledge what we won't by looking directly at the world as it actually is. The Torah understands that human beings go to war, that people are captured, that people abuse power, and that we cannot simply wish those human realities away. So the Torah takes a different approach and asks a different question. It says, once you have power over another human being, what are your obligations toward them? And once you ask that question, I think that is where we can see something genuinely progressive about this part of our tradition. By the standards of the ancient world, this Parshat is a remarkable intervention into the treatment of captives and slaves and into the into the dignity and legal status of women of antiquity. Obviously, the Torah is not giving us the modern language of individual autonomy or consent, and we should not pretend that it's trying to do that, but it is saying something radical, especially for its time. Even when you have conquered someone, you have not conquered their humanity. And that, I think, is exactly what gets lost in the Disney version of Pocahontas. Disney turns a story about colonialism and captivity into a story about romance. Instead of a traumatic story about a child bride being forced into an arranged marriage, we get a whimsical tale of a beautiful, independent young woman who chooses to fall in love with Mel Gibson. Instead of a historic account about a girl whose freedom was taken from her, we get a story about star-crossed lovers choosing each other over their respective cultures. It's a much nicer story, but it's not what happened. And perhaps that is where Torah can teach us. The Torah does not erase the idea of captivity in order to make us feel better. It tells us that this is what human beings sometimes do to one another, and then it places obligations on the person who has the power. It reminds us that while we might have authority over this person, she is still a human being created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and therefore she deserves dignity. And friends, if the Torah tells a soldier that even a person he has captured deserves dignity and protection, how much more so should we extend kindness to the people who haven't done anything to make themselves our enemies? If we are commanded to see humanity in the captive, how much more should we see the humanity of the stranger, the neighbor, the coworker, or even the person sitting across from us? Our obligations toward other people do not disappear when we have the power to ignore them. In fact, the opposite, I think, is true. The greater our power, the greater our responsibility to exercise restraint and wisdom. So perhaps Teitze reminds us that even when we have power over another person, we should never give permission to forget their humanity. And if the Torah demands dignity for a captive, how much more should we offer kindness to the people around us, especially when we have the power to ignore them? And so, for all of its historical inaccuracies, maybe Disney did get one thing right. Sometimes we really do need to learn to see the world through the colors of the wind. Shabbat Shalom.